Okay, so we're going to move on to step number 2. Okay, step number 2 is owning, acknowledging, and embracing the unresolved emotional pain from your childhood experiences. Okay, so often, when we develop that awareness, that's great. It's great to start digging deep and start noticing and taking responsibility for when we are triggered and what that's about. What in our childhood are we still hanging on to from those early experiences? But the next step we have to take is we have to start loving, acknowledging, embracing these parts of ourselves. Okay, that we have to start loving and embracing the emotional pain that was unresolved, unacknowledged, or repressed, because so often there's an element of repression or a feeling like we can't express certain emotions, and so often what we do is we repress a lot of our emotions because of these experiences. We repress them deep, subconsciously, and when we repress them, they don't go away. It's a bit like rubbish. If you take your rubbish, you put it in the rubbish bin, it goes to the rubbish tip and it accumulates there. It's not going away, it's building up. In the same way that when we have emotions, dysfunctional or normal healthy expression of emotions that we repress and we don't feel, they don't go away, they just build up internally and they get stored and we hang on to them and we keep recreating them and they become more and more intense because there's such a deep reservoir of unexpressed emotion underneath that. And every time it gets triggered, it just keeps adding to that reservoir, building internal pressure. Okay, so one of the big key steps that we have to take is we have to learn how to be with, to be present with, to love and to embrace and to acknowledge and feel fully that emotional pain that we feel that we're not allowed to express, or we've been hanging on to, and for whatever reason we've never felt safe to fully own it and express it. Okay, so I've got a few little things here, little dot points about this step that really emphasize fully what this step is about. Okay, so we have to allow ourselves to be fully vulnerable, okay? And we have to allow ourselves to fully be with the unexpressed or repressed emotions that we're not allowing ourselves to feel. We have to allow ourselves to feel them fully. We have to lean into them. We have to embrace them fully, which can be a very uncomfortable and difficult experience, because so often when we feel them, it often takes us back to that experience and we re-experience the pain. And so this is where we have to allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to fall apart and just unravel, and just to let ourselves fully be present with these feelings that we haven't allowed ourselves to be present with. And there's a certain grace, there's a certain beauty, there's a certain openness and vulnerability and courage that takes, but when it happens, it's beautiful. And you will feel like a weight has lifted off of you. So the next thing that I've written here is, it's also about looking at some of the defense mechanisms, the masks and personas that are stopping you from honoring these feelings and aspects of yourself fully. Because so often what happens is we develop defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from the pain so that we don't have to experience it again. So we try to repress it. Repression is a defense mechanism of denial. There's so many different ways we can disown these feelings that we have and disconnect ourselves to it. And one of the ways is through denial, through repression. There's so many other coping mechanisms, numbing. There's different ways that we try to numb the pain so we don't have to feel it. But so often another defense mechanism that we have is we develop a mask or a persona that we hide behind to cover up or deflect any attention towards the uncomfortable emotions that we don't want to experience. So a mask or a persona is often something that we develop as a defense mechanism to overcompensate for what we believe are our flaws, our inadequacies, and the things that we dislike about ourselves or that we believe are unlovable. Okay, so if you notice that you're going into some of these defense mechanisms, denial, shaming, blaming others instead of taking responsibility, projection, all of those different things, wearing masks and personas. It's great to start becoming conscious of those defense mechanisms, because they can sometimes stop you from being able to honor what you're truly feeling underneath those layers of defensiveness. Okay, so we want to get to the core emotions and feel those, not the external ones that sometimes are the defense mechanisms. We have to get underneath, get to those core emotions so that we can truly start that healing process. All right, turn this over. So step number 3, okay, is we need to heal our relationship with our wounded inner child, or the unloved parts of ourselves, okay? Now this step, again, is super important and very powerful. And this is like the completion step. This is the integration step where we've acknowledged the pain, and now we're integrating those experiences into our whole self, so that we're essentially loving the unlovable parts of ourselves. We're shining the light on those dark places and embracing and loving those parts of ourselves. So this step essentially can be broken down into many different processes. There's a lot of different ways that we can embark on this step. Okay, there's a lot of different processes out there that you can go through, but the 3 that I think, or the 2 that I feel have been most powerful and significant for me and my clients are inner child journey work, okay, which is having a dialogue with your inner child, and shadow work, okay, which is all about loving and owning and loving and embracing the unloved parts of yourself. And it's also about finding the gifts, of these traumatic experiences, and finding the gifts of these aspects of yourself that you don't love, that you feel are unlovable, these disowned parts. Okay, so they're just a few different processes. Now I want to go through and talk about some of these different processes in a little bit more detail, so you get a bit of an insight on how to start this process of healing your relationship with your wounded child, and healing that trauma that you're hanging on to from your past experiences, so you don't pass that on to your children. You break that cycle of generational trauma. Okay, so inner child journey work is really about taking an inner journey to your innermost child. And again, when I do this with clients, what I often do is I get them into a meditative type relaxed state, and I ask them to go back, maybe on a bus or back on a journey to their inner child, to whatever age their inner child is, and I ask them to tell me where they are, what age they are, what are they doing. And then we have a dialogue with this child, this part of themselves, this child at whatever age that child is. Sometimes it's 9, sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's really young. And the dialogue is always very personal, but it usually involves talking to that inner child and asking them questions, asking them what do they need to feel loved, to feel whole, to feel safe, all of those things. And just asking that question to our inner child when we're in that deeply connected state to that part of ourself is very powerful, and a lot of amazing healing insights. And it's a very powerful healing experience. And personally, from my experience of doing that and doing those inner journey meditations myself and taking clients through them, it's amazing what our inner child has to say to us, and what we can do in our relationship to that inner child just by giving it what it needs, the love, the appreciation, the approval, by helping it feel safe, giving it a hug, embracing it. And there's so many different answers that come when people ask that question to their inner child, but they're all super powerful and always leads to a very transformative and special healing experience. So that is one process that you can engage in that I would highly recommend to create a healing transformation and to fully integrate those aspects of yourself. Because shadow work, again, you may have experienced or heard about shadow work. I talk about shadow work in some of my other videos. Again, it's a really powerful process to go through. Shadow work is essentially about embracing, loving, and owning certain aspects of yourself that you feel are unlovable, Now, sometimes those aspects will be conscious to us. Sometimes we'll have to become conscious of those aspects by looking at how they're being reflected back to us in our children, oftentimes in our children or in other relationships. So looking at what do we most dislike and despise about other people, about our children, what triggers us the most emotionally in our relationships with others, what aspects of that they demonstrate of their behavior are the most triggering, because they are often where our deepest wounds are, and they're also where we are disowning aspects of ourselves and projecting those aspects that we dislike about ourselves onto somebody else. And this is a very unconscious mechanism. So often when we have parts of ourselves that we don't love, that we don't embrace, that we're trying to avoid or not be, then we often unconsciously project those aspects of ourselves onto other people, and we disown them and we blame and shame other people for expressing them because it represents something we haven't loved in ourselves. So by looking at where those traits and aspects that we see in those people, where we have them, and seeing that we own them too to the same degree, and taking back those unloved parts of ourselves and owning them. And then the next step is finding the gifts, of those parts of ourselves, finding how do these aspects of ourselves serve us on a highest level, on a spiritual level, how they serve us in different areas of our life. Because often the parts of ourselves that we feel are completely negative actually have very powerful and empowering positive gifts that they come bearing. And when we don't express, when we disown those traits, we also disown the gifts that they bring into our life. Let's even look at anger, for example. Anger is something that's often seen as a very negative thing. And if somebody has a really negative association with anger because they had abuse or an angry parent, they often will disown their anger or repress their anger or try not to be angry, and that creates a very dysfunctional, unhealthy relationship with their anger because they don't express boundaries, because they have trouble expressing their needs or speaking up for themselves. So anger is our personal power. It's our ability to express boundaries. It's our ability to say we're not happy with something. So if we shut down our anger, we also shut down a lot of those important intuitive senses that we have that are actually important parts of our empowerment, of us owning and being who we are and being authentic and being true to ourselves. So there are many different ways in which some of these negative things that we believe are negative, emotions or aspects of ourselves that we believe are negative, have so many gifts. And then when we start to love and embrace them, we actually are able to embody a very functional and healthy version of the expression of those aspects and traits. And they can serve us. So again, another thing we can do is work on and find the gifts of some of the potentially traumatic or experiences that we believe we experienced when we were children. So when we had a traumatic experience, regardless of how painful it is and how much trauma we experience, there are always hidden gifts and positive aspects of these experiences that we need to acknowledge that often aren't acknowledged, and it's usually very one-sided. So by being able to go back and to fully acknowledge the gifts and the benefits and how those experiences served you on a higher level is a very powerful process to do as well. And I'd like to share, just to finish, a bit of an example of my own personal journey. So for me, one of the biggest things that I had shame around from my experience, my childhood experiences with mainly my dad and probably the culture that he grew up in, that he projected onto me, was all around expressing femininity, expressing my feminine, sensitive side and expressing emotions and vulnerability. Because when I was a child, we didn't do vulnerability. My dad really didn't do vulnerability because he had learned to be very tough, to hide his emotions because he experienced a lot of bullying. He had learned to hide his emotions and not be vulnerable so that he could not get bullied. He learned to protect himself and become very tough and very stoic, but that meant that he repressed a lot of his sensitivity and those aspects. And that's what I did, is I started to repress. As a young child, I would repress my sensitivity. I would repress my emotions, my healthy expression of emotions, and I would see femininity as a weakness because of some of the different belief systems and chauvinism that was part of that culture. And as a result of that, I tried very hard to be tough, to be masculine, to be strong, and I repressed a lot of my feelings, my fears, and it was a very unhealthy dynamic that it created. And as a result, it created this internal split inside of me, this split that led me to be very dysfunctional and have a lot of unhealthy repressed emotions, because I didn't, I thought I had a lot of negative association with expressing my emotions, especially negative emotions like shame and fear and guilt openly. And because of that, I repressed it a lot, and that started to run my life and hijack my experience of life. And then as I started to unconceal and love and embrace these aspects of myself, I started to realize that the reason why I experienced depression and anxiety for such a big part of my life was because of these unloved parts of myself. These were parts of me that were so important for me to own and express, but because I was disowning them, and because I had this split, it caused me a lot of suffering. It caused me to become very inauthentic and to fall into a deep depression and anxiety. And when I started to really unfold on this healing journey, and I was able to fully love and embrace and find the gifts in these parts of myself, all of the anxiety and the depression fell away. It fell away because I was no longer hiding myself, from the world. I was being true to who I am at my core, and I was owning myself fully. And then I realized that the depression and anxiety was only feedback from my higher self trying to get me to, recognize that the very thing that I was so scared of embracing was the very thing that was going to liberate me, that was going to put me on this path that I love so much, which is helping people with this work, with navigating their vulnerability, their emotions, and authenticity. This was the very thing that I was most scared of, was the very thing that actually led to the most empowering and amazing healing experiences on a personal level for me. And the more I was able to see that my sensitivity was a gift, not a curse, and that my emotions were powerful, and then I needed to, and just owning my femininity, when I really stepped into my feminine aspects and I was able to own my femininity, it was such a beautiful gift. And it's brought so many gifts into my life, in my relationship with my wife, with my kids, and on so many different levels that I can't begin to describe to you. So I highly, recommend, and I say from the deepest part of my heart, that this process is worth it. And the amount of insight and amazing things that can come from doing it are just, that they're limitless. So I really encourage you to take the time to go into and look at all these different steps of the process, so that you can truly heal the trauma of the past, and you can step forward and be free to express who you are fully, and then allow your children to express fully who they are. And then you'll be able to love them for who they are instead of who you project onto them. And in doing so, you'll be able to break that cycle of generational trauma. So thank you for tuning in. Please like and share this video. Please start a discussion in the comment section. I love to have discussions and talk with people. This is great to share and talk about. I want to start a community, so please start a discussion, and I'll be replying in the comment section below. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.